We're just letting everyone connect. Just give us just a moment and we'll be starting shortly. Take it away, Christoph.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us tonight for this webinar. I am Kristóf Nagy, the moderator of this event, the editor of the Hungarian Journal of Fordulat and a member of the Helyzet working group for public sociology. And I will actually present these two organizations at a later point. And besides this, I am a PhD candidate at the Central European University at the Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology. And before starting the actual webinar, I will briefly introduce the structure of the webinar. We have nine speakers today covering 10 organizations, so we have a busy evening. First of all, Ágnes Gagyi will introduce the webinar series and the volume, which is the occasion of the seminar series. Thereafter, we will hear 8 pitches, no longer than 5 minutes, and about the organizations. And I asked the participants to brief us about primarily about the challenges which they are facing and the innovations that they innovated in their actual practice. The slides of the presentations will be available after the session, so you don't have to read them super quickly or you don't have to try to download them. And one more important reminder that the session is recorded and the recording will be shared thereafter. And if you have any questions or comments regarding the presentations during the presentations, please share them in the chat box. And after the 8 brief presentations, I will summarize the questions, and then thereafter the speakers will have a shorter round to answer the questions and reflect on them. So these are the practical parts of the webinar. Now the floor is Ágnes Gagyi's to introduce the whole series.
Yes, thank you, Kristóf. Hi, everyone. My name is Ágnes Gagyi, and together with Ondrej Šlačelek, we are the co-editors of this new volume that just came out. I will post the link in the chat. It's called The Political Economy of Eastern Europe, 30 Years into the Transition, New Left Perspectives from the Region. And this volume basically came out from a longer collaboration with some colleagues with whom we were trying to basically just document some of the analysis that a new generation of new left thinkers from the region have produced. Of course, both this knowledge and the conversations that are going on are broader than the book. The aim was rather to contribute to this by making available in English some of the analyses that are more known only in local language circles, and it's hard to share it amongst each other and internationally. And this collaboration happened together with TNI, the Transnational Institute in Amsterdam. So since the New Left discussions and the issues that are involved in them in Eastern Europe are much broader than what the book covers. We thought that with the occasion of the publication of the book, we won't just organize book releases, but rather a webinar series that tackle several key issues that take the discussion further than the book does. And this webinar now isn't even about just one topic, like the last one was on Chinese investments in Eastern Europe, but it's about our own condition. How do we even manage to produce knowledge from the left in the region? So I'm really looking forward to all that you are going to share with us. And we just also wanted to thank the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation and the European Cultural Foundation for supporting our work on the project at its different phases.
Thank you, Agnes, for the brief introduction of the volume and of the webinar series. And now I would like to give the floor to Adela, Hîncu, and Mary Taylor, who will introduce the LeftEast in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Krzysztof, and thank you, Agnes, for the invitation and all the organizers for bringing us together. This presentation I prepared together with my colleague, Mary Taylor, who is also here, and together we will be answering questions in the Q&A later on. A little bit about our organization. We are organized on volunteer labor, and we have gotten small grants for summer encounter organizing, what we call the convergences, towards which higher earners in the collective also redistribute. So in this sense, we are free of market pressures, but on the other hand, we are all academics or activists or both, which means that we have constant constraints on our ability for sustained editorial work. We also commission work from authors with similar constraints, and beyond what we write and what we commission, we receive occasional submissions, we repost articles, and in the past year, great source of articles has been translations of pieces published in different languages from the region through ELMO, that is the Eastern European Left Media Outlet, a network of 13 Eastern leftist media platforms that publish in 11 languages, to which leftist members also contribute a lot of labor. So following the initial stream of articles from the 2012-2014 wave of protests in the region, LeftEast has also had low points in terms of getting material, and especially what we consider to be good material. So far, a solution to this has been adding new editors who bring new energy to keep the process going, and I myself joined the collective a year ago. While some of our editors are more attached to the idea of the editorial more traditionally, and there is often discussion about having an editorial line and structuring quality better, others have seen working with authors who are situating themselves on the left in the region as part of the relational and solidarity labor that we do, even if it means a lot of work on pieces that need to be developed more. However, sometimes, regardless of the work that the authors and the editors put in, this process also fails, which is why the summer convergences are so important. In the past, they tended to these connections to the conversations and growth processes, as there was time both for debate and bonding, as well as for strategic discussion and planning. The process of knowledge production at LeftEast also means coming together to try to develop positions, even if broad, on certain topics when we are confronted with submissions or with world events that we need to respond to. The discussions around these can be quite intense and time-consuming, but they help the collective get on the same page and also learn about one another and about the region together. And so now I'm going to present such an example, which was the process through which we reacted to the events in Sheikh Jarrah and the Gaza Strip back in May. So the collective debated several strategic points with relevance to knowledge production practices from the left, of which I will now briefly mention 4. The first point has to do with the temporality of political and epistemic intervention. So we debated between an immediate statement of solidarity as a ritualistic gesture of political positioning, but also as a sort of guidepost, or a slower paced, more multifaceted analysis. So here the experience of developing our solidarity statement was that intense short-term investment from editors resulted in learning within the collective, but also in laying down a foundation for production of sustained analysis on the medium term. That is the way we plan the pieces we solicit and the themes of the convergences. The second point that came out of the discussions was the positioning of LeftEast as still a voice from the region of Eastern Europe broadly defined, but simultaneously a voice geographically expanded, both by its editors' backgrounds and research interests, and by their actual physical location, which is often outside the region through academic migration. So in this particular case, this meant commenting on the constitutive role of the Eastern European experience of anti-Semitism, participation in the Holocaust, and post-war and post-socialist memory politics for the current context, as well as grounding it in the military, economic, and geopolitical ties of the region with Israel today. The third point that came out of the discussions has to do with reaching a conceptual and positional consensus by considering the socio-political significance of the language available to us, such as war, conflict, peace, self-determination, liberation, settler colonialism, apartheid, and so on. At the same time, we had to consider the likely reception of our conceptual choice back in the region, as well as within the leftist community. And in the end, our statement was translated in several languages in the region, as well as in Arabic. The fourth and final point has to do with collective care work. So despite really intense feelings, we managed pretty well to hold space for each other and to exercise elements of care work that we think is essential to being a collective, navigating differences and the intensity of the exchange. However, we did learn that even though we thought we were moving slowly, a few members found it too fast to keep up, partly because of the sheer volume of the emails exchanged, partly because of having to manage the contradictions and tensions in the environments they worked or lived in. So, as a conclusion, part of the knowledge that we are producing at LeftEast is in developing our approach to what it means to be part of a collective in which care and not just content is important. I will end with just a word on the future. As LeftEast moved to a new web domain, we have also started to consider its role not just as a producer of knowledge, but also as an archive, and our own role as curators of these archives. In this organization of the archive, we are moving from a system of mutually exclusive categories and tagging to a more flexible mapping, but at the same time, a more editorially subjective highlighting of themes which we identify as central to LeftEast. We are only at the beginning of this meta-processing of the LeftEast content, which would make editorial choices more overt, but also in a sense less democratic, if that means giving everything we publish equal visibility, even if that means lower visibility. So this process will require a more complex reckoning with the issue of temporality in knowledge production from the left as well, which documents current issues, aims to offer longer-term contextual and tactical analysis, but should also reflect on and reintegrate its own intellectual genealogy, recouping ideas from its past and prefiguring knowledge for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adela. Our next speaker is Luba Kubova from the Prague-based journal Contradictions. So, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting Contradictions and inviting me to this debate. I come from a fairly different background than Adela and Mary, so my presentation will be a bit different, I believe. So firstly, I'll introduce Contradictions as a journal. So Contradiction is a journal that aims to provide space for texts that are related to intellectual traditions of this region, as well as for texts that react to contemporary social problems. So Contradictions is a journal that is published once a year, is a single volume comprising of 2 issues, one published in English and the other one in Czech and Slovak. So in the Czech and Slovak issue, we specifically aim to introduce local readership to internationally significant intellectual trends on the left. So in the past issue, it was, for example, social reproduction theory. And in the English issue, we try to bring together local and international debates. And also we try to introduce maybe less known and untranslated authors from the region. So in the last issue, it was, for example, Yugoslav philosopher Blaženka Despot. So Contradictions is primarily a scholarly journal that nevertheless would like to be comprehensible to wider audiences beyond the academia. So the publisher of Contradictions is Filozofia, publishing house of the Institute of Philosophy of the Czech Academy of Sciences based in Prague. Submitted articles, scholarly studies undergo an anonymized review process, while we also have space for discussion pieces and book reviews that do not undergo this rigorous review process. Our editorial collective of 12 members comes from various disciplines. Primarily, it's intellectual history, philosophy, literary theory, history, and political theory. So our 12-member editorial collective does not subscribe to a particular current, left theorizing, or to a particular political platform. So I think what we share is the stress on the importance of local knowledge production, both past and present. Secondly, the importance of historical materialist analysis. And thirdly, stress on radical democratic traditions widely understood. Many editorial collective members are also involved in other collectives operating primarily in Prague, so be it labor unions, intellectual and political associations, or political parties. So this means that we have other outlets for left organizing towards social change. And we also have other outlets for intellectual reflection apart from Contradictions as well. So this, I believe, contributes to the intellectual and political openness of Contradictions. Contradictions is primarily a publication platform. Last year, however, we started to organize public events for wider audiences in Prague. A discussion series, which was titled Paths in Emancipation, took place on YouTube channel of the Municipal Library in Prague. It comprised 3 pre-recorded interviews on basically the social movements of today, such as Black Lives Matter, the Polish Black protest, and on the organizing of Uber workers in London. So we believe that this cooperation with local actors who have their own audiences and readerships, such as the Municipal Library in Prague, may contribute to something what we may call normalization of left and radical democratic perspectives in public debate. And we will continue with this discussion series this fall as well. I would say that the strength of Contradictions in sustaining what you may call the production of high quality left analysis stems to a great extent from the journal's embeddedness in the academic environment. So the Institute of Philosophy at the Czech Academy of Sciences provides substantial in-kind and work time support to the publishing project. The publication of the 2020 and 2021 volume, which focused on left feminism and left dissent, respectively, was preceded by international workshops. And their organization wouldn't be possible without the financial support of Net for Dissent Network, which is an initiative of the Cost Action. So, and I think that this embeddedness in academic environment like shields us a bit from market pressures, but it doesn't shield us from academic capitalism pressures in any case. So from this point or from this perspective, what was important that from 2021 volume on, Contradictions are indexed in Scopus database, which is a fact that is completely irrelevant to our international contributors from so-called West, but it's rather important change that makes a difference for academic careers of our contributors from Czech Republic, Slovakia, and perhaps from other countries as well. So I think that there are many issues that we might be working on in the future. I think what would consider certain, what would require certain attention is gender balance in terms of authority collective and editorial board, as well as really trying to creating a platform for intellectual reflection of the social and political movements here in Prague or in the region. So thank you very much. This is it.
Thank you very much, Luba. And I give directly the floor to Anastasia Riabchuk from the Ukrainian Commons Journal.
Yes, thank you very much. So I represent Commons, a Journal of Social Critique, and currently it works as a website with regular publications like 2 or 3 times per week on a range of social issues. And we address both the kind of more empirical questions, the various social problems in our society, and also more theoretical texts. We also do translations of like key Marxist thinkers, for example, that are unavailable in Ukrainian. So we offer those translations. And from the very beginning, when we started in 2010, we had like several audiences that we were looking at and wanted to engage with, and also several like motives for why we were doing this. And I can identify maybe the 3 key audiences and the 3 key motivations. So the first one that was already also mentioned by previous participants was that many of us were in academia. We were working at universities, teaching courses, and we wanted to have a publication where we, first of all, could engage with each other and publish our own work, but also have a text that we could refer students to offer some readings to our students, to engage some of our students in writing for us as well. And in fact, several of our students from 2010, 2011 are now in the editorial board or contributing regularly as authors. So this is actually a successful innovation in our case of doing such a resource in collaboration with the university context, with students in social sciences. And the second motivation and the second audience that we were looking at was activists and people who are practically engaged in working with different social issues, and many of us are activists as well. And in fact, in the first years, we were also doing a print journal biannually that was focused on a specific issue, where there are currently some social movements trying to work on issues like, for example, transformations of urban space and commercialization of public spaces, or issues of the environment or human rights, racism, gender, and so on. And we see, in fact, there are many initiatives, like grassroots initiatives in the country, but often they lack a bigger theoretical perspective and an awareness of the broader structural context. So we wanted to offer that context to those activists, to highlight some of the aspects of those problems that we found important from a kind of more critical leftist perspective. For example, with the urban studies, that is like a very big theme, and also there are many activist initiatives in many cities. One of the translations, first translation that we did was David Harvey's Right to the City, and we introduced that concept and why it is important to speak about right to the city. And these questions actually are also we are very well received actually in those contexts, even though often they're not very kind of leftist, but they are interested in what we say, what we offer, because often we give a bigger perspective and a bigger context, and there's potential for collaboration. In the last years, there are also some in the protests, the left has been visible on the streets. For example, we have a climate march or the March for the City in Kiev recently, where there was a separate leftist column, and members of our editorial board were also there. And so we form networks like that with the activists and people who are practically engaged in various social issues. And the third audience and the third kind of motivation for us to get engaged is the kind of the bigger so-called civil society and the discourses about like what's happening in our society that are presented by civil society often as it's like a common sense consensus, especially things like market reforms. Like, okay, reforms is something good. So there's a consensus that we should support neoliberal market reforms. Or more recently, in the context of war, there's a militarization in kind of civil society discourses, and these are not problematized. So we felt that there are some voices that are marginalized or nearly absent, and that it is important to offer a critical voice, and we are often the only ones who are able to offer that critical voice, the critique of neoliberal market reforms or anti-military position. And in these situations, we often are less well received and not so well understood by the so-called civil society, and dismissed as these leftists, the agents of Kremlin, and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, it is important for us that these voices are heard and are articulated, at least on our website, because often the civil society does not really represent society. And if we look at statistics, we will see, for example, that majority of Ukrainians do not support, for example, privatization of land or changes to the labor code that cut down on workers' rights, or even with the war, there's not such a big overwhelming support in society of the excessive militarization in our society. So we want to show that that consensus that exists in civil society does not really represent Ukrainian society, and we want to highlight the other voices. So these would be kind of the three main areas where we focus on the kind of main audiences, and it's a mix of successes and challenges, I guess. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. And our next speaker is Vladimir Simovis from the Center for Political Emancipation from Serbia. So, Vladimir, let's hear you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for invitation to participate in this event. I will talk briefly about my organization, which is called Center for the Politics of Emancipation. This organization exists for 10 years now. Before this, we were all activists and students of sociology. Our background is political, let's say, background is a student movement that struggled against commercialization of education. But when we were finishing studies, we wanted to at the same time continue being activists and also sociologists, and establishing this NGO was one of the ways to somehow connect these two of our interests. So our idea was at the beginning to work on connection of different actors, which were from our point of view separated, but were struggling for the same cause, and this was, let's say, public good. So our work was based on connecting, for example, on the one side, trade unionists, also activists that were struggling, for example, for public spaces, or cultural activists, and also to connect, let's say, progressive academics. And this was one of our goals at the beginning. After that, we continued with establishing, let's say, some educational programs like conferences or summer schools. And this was quite important for us because, as in the rest of Eastern Europe, the whole, let's say, left-wing infrastructure was wiped out. There was no progressive voices, or they were quite marginalized. So we were basically building this infrastructure from the scratch, and we were trying to make this infrastructure through which some kind of progressive ideas or an analysis or class analysis could be heard and visible. So we organized a lot of public events where we invited people from the region, but also from all around the world who are progressive and influential, to try to make our perspective more visible and to open space for dialogue and discussion on some of the issues we wanted. Also, we organized summer schools, and one of the summer schools was quite important for us. It was a regional summer school where we connected different left-wing actors. For example, at the time, people in Slovenia, left-wing oriented, established party. So this was also, let's say, a place where we could hear and learn from their experience how to politically organize and you know, how to build your political entity. At the same time, we were doing, beside these events, we were doing also analysis. There was a lack of let's say left-wing perspective on what happened in past 3 decades, especially in this period of transition. So we did alternative, let's say, analysis of these processes, especially privatization, and we continued to build on these analysis and to try to build some policy proposals that left can put forward and articulated in wider public. The problem is that we don't have political actor, so we are at the same time producers of the knowledge, and also we are trying to build political actors. So we are trying to connect, and these two. It is difficult, but you need 2 legs, let's say, to walk and to go forward. 5 years ago, we established one educational program called the Studies of Socialism. In this period, we figured out that we need, let's say, continuous work with a group of people, not just conferences or summer schools where you have people who come and leave and you don't have a space to work with them continuously. So we established a program called Studies of Socialism, which is 1-year program. In the first semester, we are doing more theoretical lectures about class, about socialist feminism, about the state, self-management in Yugoslavia, and so on and so on. In the second semester, we are more policy-oriented, and we are more discussing about concrete political proposals the left could put forward today. So we are discussing urban questions, ecological issues, living wage, basic income, not always like advocating for these policies, but critically analyzing them. So this program lasts for 5 years now, and we have a lot of applicants. It's mostly students, but it is really, really good and important to work with people continuously, not just to have, let's say, 1 or 2 events. So we are also, as I said, creating policy proposals. We are trying to pick topics that are, let's say, relevant for everyone. Like one of the topics that we did was right to water. And from our analysis and our work, Right to Water initiative emerged. And this was also one of the, for us, important steps, how to connect, let's say, this more analytic stuff and more, let's say, academic stuff to the concrete movement and concrete political actions. Also, we are part of Clean Clothes campaign. If some of you probably know what Clean Clothes campaign is. So we are working with the workers who are working in textile or garment industry. So we are also, let's say, have this groundwork with workers where we are trying to help them to organize in trade unions and to negotiate with brands and fight for better working conditions. So this is also, let's say, more practical stuff. So let's say that we are catch-all organization from analysis to educational programs and to more practical organizing. At the same time, as I said, some of us are trying to politically organize and to go beyond this NGO framework, and we are establishing a political actor that hopefully will participate in coming elections in Belgrade. So this is briefly from my side. I'm looking forward to questions and hearing other as well.
Thank you very much, Vladimir, for the brief introduction. And for the next, we will hear Maria Charnat, who will speak on the one hand on the Cluj-based Institute for Social Solidarity and hopefully also on the media project, The Barricade, right?
Yes. Okay, very glad to be here. Nice to meet you all. My name is Maria Cernat. I work in Romania as an academic at Titu Maiorescu University and the National School of Political Science and Administration. And I'm the vice president of the Institute of Social Solidarity and also a proud member of a journalistic collective called The Barricade. Now, a little bit about the Institute for Social Solidarity. This institute is basically an NGO that was created with the idea of challenging mainstream narratives in Romania and producing exactly knowledge from the left. That is knowledge that challenges what has been in Romania the mainstream narrative, the mainstream framework or conceptual framework of explaining social, economic, and political phenomena, and that was right-wing usually, and for the most part. We wanted to challenge this, but from an academic perspective, and we were able to produce some articles, debates, interviews, and successful conference that my colleague Sorin Gog organized, and of course with others from our collective. Now, the Institute, unfortunately, what I wanted to say that as long as you don't have enough local and regional platforms to express and to put this knowledge in, the project seems to be threatened because, as the Luba said, they have a journal and it's indexed and so on and so forth, meaning what? That we are still bound to play by the rules set up by the capitalist academic system, that you still have to have journals indexed in the most prestigious databases such as Clarivate, X, ICI Thomson, such as, I don't know, Scopus and others. So you still have to have this very, I would say, production-focused knowledge that aims to provide those who contribute to your journal with points. So we are still in this framework of scientrometric, the scientrometric mode of academic production. And it is very hard to overcome this since unfortunately, knowledge is not shared as an end in itself, but as a means to gain points in your CV to advance in your academic career, as we know, and to gain access to grants. It is a very, very, I would say, very difficult to overcome system, a prison that is very difficult to escape from, I would dare say. And this is why I suggested that I also discuss another initiative that I am a member of, and that is the Barricade. This is a journalistic initiative, and it's close to my work since I've been teaching for a number of years in the communication and public relations departments. So I'm close to the media phenomenon. And this publication offered a place where finally, I felt like I was able to research, to engage with people, with ideas, without the fear that maybe what I've done and all my work led to nothing in terms of the so-called points that you have to put in your CV. So this is where I felt completely free and producing quality knowledge and political information and political analysis from a detached perspective, from a perspective that is not related to this system that I've been trying to sketch here. Now, this initiative, the Barricade, started in 2016 when the Bulgarian-born Polish journalist Boyan Stanislavski had the idea to come back to Bulgaria, where he had a lot of friends and connections, and to start off a publishing house that would at the same time be the place and the institutional support for the online platform that is the Barricade. And the Barricade started in Bulgarian, but the next year they started a section in Romanian and a section in English. And I say it is a quite successful leftist project, and we published a lot of articles. We publish in English, we publish in Romanian, we publish in Bulgarian. They managed to have journalists hired, and they published on a daily basis articles regarding the realities in Bulgaria. And that is something I say very, very unique, to have left-leaning journalists publish on a daily basis 1 or 2 articles. That is something. Now, we also have 3 podcasts. We have a very successful in Bulgarian podcast that is produced by our comrade Mirena Filipova along with Nikolai Draganov, where they discuss in Bulgarian about the local realities. Then we have On the Barricades. And this is a podcast that I produce along with Boyan Stanislavski. We are co-hosting the show. And we are trying to offer a regional perspective on events from a critical perspective, while at the same time challenging the mainstream Western narrative. We wanted to be a point of reference for what is happening in Eastern Europe. And this is why I'm very happy to say that we started a collaboration with The Analysis, a Canadian podcast. It is on Canadian journalist Paul J that produces this, and he invited us once a month to come up with a briefing on what's happening in the region. And we are doing that with the information from Poland, Bulgaria, and Romania. And we also have a podcast that is called Cross Border Talks, that is produced by Vladimir Mitev and Malgorzata Kulbacevska-Figat, our comrades. Malgorzata is from Poland and Vladimir from Bulgaria, and they try to analyze the impact of the Western power games on Eastern Europe. So it is more focused on international relations. And yeah, this is pretty much it. This is the project. We are struggling financially. We are struggling, and we are trying to find ways to finance this project that's been ongoing. We are very much in need for financial support at the time. And we do all we can to secure the money for the wages of the Bulgarian colleagues, since they are the driving force. And the academics, me and Malgorzata, are people that are just collaborating in this journalistic collective. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Maria, for the extensive introduction. And our next speaker is Oleg Raviev from St. Petersburg. So Oleg, please share your experiences with the Public Sociology Laboratory.
Okay, can you hear me? And can you see me? No. Yes. Can you hear me now? Okay. So yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Oleg Zhuravlev, and I don't want to to spend all the time introducing and describing all the details of our team, Public Sociology Laboratory. I just want to focus on several things which are crucial from our point of view for any collaboration with our colleagues from Eastern Europe and abroad. So first of all, like we were like the background of our team is that like we were students in Moscow who were protesters in our university, and we then were expelled from the university because like we demanded better quality of education, and we wanted to stop corruption. Then we decided to organize our research group, and then like we became more or less successful in Russia research group. So then many of us like were philosophers or political theorists. Very quickly we understood that if we really want to be democratic and left-wing thinkers, we should to transform ourselves from theoreticians to empirical researchers. And now our idea is, I mean, we like, some people were like psychoanalysts, philosophers. Now what we are doing is very empirical research in different areas, and we try to do expert research, okay, with theoretical background, but which would be really useful for creating a program of social reforms, of economic reforms for the future left-wing party in Russia. And it is now when it is important because within the political crisis of the Putin state, now we see that the political opposition, which is much more powerful than us, the liberal one, is introducing political debates over different political programs. So this is the area in which we can be more powerful, more influential than our liberal opponents and colleagues. So that is why we try to reorganize and to reorient our team from purely academic research into like expert research in different spheres like housing, economic, budgets, etc., in order to be able to offer new political program for social change, because now we see that there is a demand from very different audiences to comprehend, to listen to read these programs. Another thing, like being students and then being PhD students in the West, we realized that being from like catching up, like secondary and periphery country, we can witness some tendencies that are leading in the whole world. I mean, some new liberal policies, some type of protests, like mass revolutionary uprisings that refuse any articulation of social demands, for example, which were quite spread in both West and East, and Russian, Ukrainian, and other uprisings from 2011 to 2014 were like pioneering from this point of view. And after we realized it, we started to collaborate with some leading social theorists from the West, like Laurent Thévenot or Nina Elizov, and we talked much about this with Agnes and other people who are with us here, and now we think that we have enough empirical data and research experience from Eastern Europe, from post-Soviet world, which is relevant for the global world to start producing Marxist analysis. So this is what can be done internationally, globally, within the left camp of social researchers. Our topics are social movements, revolutions, state capitalism, and precarity in the work. So concerning our team, these two tendencies are, I think, the most important within last years. First of all, we turned from the purely academic work to expert work, which is helpful for articulating and offering new political program within political opposition and political debate in Putin's Russia. And here we really need some collaboration with economists, social scientists who used to be working on such topics. At the same time, we think like that comparative research within Eastern Europe and post-Soviet region dedicated to mass protest movements, state capitalism, etc., already showed that some tendencies with this within this events are like really global and more global than within the global world itself. So we now really need to start left-wing Marxist analysis, and we need summer schools, some possibilities to share the data, and to organize different research groups to analyze this data and to produce really relevant for the global world Marxist theory. And I think these two elements, these two tendencies, which we opened up for ourselves, could be really relevant for our collaboration in future, and we call for considering these options as options for collaborative work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oleg. And thank you for everyone who already wrote comments into the chat box, and feel free to add additional comments in the next minutes. And now it's time to introduce Vitalie Sprinceana, who will the next speaker of us from the Moldavian Platzforma. So Vitalie, floor is yours.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you for inviting Platzforma to this event. It's an honor for us, and it's process that we want to start to internationalize our efforts, both at the regional and more generally European and global level. We started, like, we have this interesting story that we started, like, our online platform was created around 8 years ago, and the organization, the NGO that is kind of trying to support the media platform was created only 3 years ago. So we first created the media platform. It emerged as a reaction or as a response to the fact that we as activists didn't have media voice. Like, we were doing some protests in the city related to democratization of the city, protests against the commercialization of public spaces, and the media was distorting what we're doing. So we felt that there is a need for us to build a media voice. So we built it as a media platform, as a kind of a voice that didn't have, we started it as a hobby. So for us, it was important to have this positioning. We were there, we put the flag, and we're here to discuss things from another perspective. So I'll not very much stop about what we do in describing in details the activities. I will directly try to address the topic of today's discussion. Unfortunately, for those that want to look for more activities of Platzforma in English or in other languages, there is not that much, because until now, most of our efforts were kind of local, which is because of the low level of resources that we can access to translate things, but also because our focus was until now mainly local. So in terms of knowledge production, we're somewhere in between the academia and NGOs and activism. We're doing mostly what could be qualified as grassroots research, like grassroots sociology, grassroots history. And for us, this dimension is very important. Maria was mentioning about the problems with the kind of traditional official academic research. So we're trying to kind of avoid that, or not to fall into these pitfalls of the traditional research. It would be a very simplistic kind of distinction that will make that our directions in terms of knowledge production, there are 3 directions, and they are past, present, and future. And all of them are important. In terms of knowledge production about the past, we're trying to do several things. First, to recover the archive of protests, of movements, of various other processes through which we're trying to recover a local history of the left. You know what happens after the collapse of the Soviet Union, as if the whole social history, the history of protests, of strikes, of struggles have been erased. So we are trying to recover that. We're also participating in discussions about the past, because right now it's kind of very important. We see the glorification of nationalism, of fascism. So we are trying to build counter narratives, to do our own grassroots historical research. In terms of the present, most of the speakers have already mentioned it. We're trying to build a counter narrative on the neoliberalization of the region and neoliberal reforms, trying to build a social critique, to put forward policy proposals. But also, and that for us is also very important, to open the debate and the discussion by also presenting new alternatives, new ways of organizing politics, the economy, the cultural sector, and so on and so forth. Because for us this is very important, because it goes against the narrative that there is no alternative, that there is only one way of doing things. And that is also very important for us to do this. And in terms of the future, we're trying to kind of reclaim our right to build the future, in the sense that we don't want, we will participate in this discussion where future is being presented as something inevitable, and you know it, like automatization is coming, technology is it's presenting as if you don't have any choice or any option than to adapt to it. And we're trying to open kind of these possibilities. We call it mold of futurism, like kind of imagining another Moldova, or what could be another Moldova, or what could kind of can be the future that we can build for ourselves. Like in terms of immediate plans, we next year want to work very much in the direction of labor and labor rights. We're already part of CCC as other colleagues, and we're investigating the conditions in the textile sector mostly, but we want to do investigations about other areas of work and labor. Also, we want to be very active in ecology and democracy. We call it generally, but democratization of the economy, feminism, and equity. So basically, these are like, this would be the first the kind of the main points. I'll be very glad to answer the questions at the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vitalie. Last but not least, I will introduce two Hungarian projects, two interconnected projects, the Journal Fordulat and the Working Group for Public Sociology Helyzet, and I am involved in both of projects, and as I mentioned, these are interconnected, and I am working from day to day to make them even more entangled. So in my mind, or in my narratives, they were really close to each other. The Fordulat is an academic journal that publishes academic articles, but actually places its stakes out of academia. And actually, during your presentations, I had to realize that maybe one of our specificities is that we have a really young editorial team. The majority of our editors are in their 20s, with all the pros and cons of this constellation. At Fordulat, with time, we crystallized the ambition of not only the ambition that it is not enough to translate the high quality left analysis from the West. So, for example, it is not enough to translate David Harvey, although it's important into Hungarian, but it is also important to facilitate the publishing of local knowledges of the left, and it's even more important to reach into a wider audience besides the already committed leftist circles, of course. And you can ask that, what does it mean in a practical level? It means that we started putting together thematic or special issues, because we had to realize that titles like Capitalism and Climate Crisis, or Sex, Love, and Intimacy Under Capitalism are much more popular, and with these titles we can reach out to an audience that would never open a journal called Left Analysis, Left Review, or anything including left or communism or socialism and so on. Furthermore, we try to organize reading groups to all of our issues to deepen the knowledge which is published in the issues, because we had to realize that just because someone buys the journal, it doesn't mean that they even read it. So if we organize these educational tools, it really helps to deepen the knowledge. We also do our best to organize issue launches in which we clearly articulate the main takeaways of the issues without any academic stakes. So yes, I think it's clear. And we also try to organize issue launches outside of Budapest, not only in Budapest. So in the last years, we organized events in other large cities, such as Pécs and Szeged and Cluj and so on. And last but not least, we try to select topics for the further issues, not only by considering whether the topic is academically a hot topic or not, but also by considering that how can it contribute to the building of left movements of the left in Hungary, or how can it inform movements of the left in Hungary. But of course, the project of the Journal Fordulat is full with challenges, so I will just briefly introduce 4 of these challenges. The first is that I think sometimes there is a lack of synergy between knowledge production and knowledge distribution, and despite the fact that Fordulat's objective is to publish Marxist or anti-capitalist articles, in several topics we don't have enough local Marxist knowledge, or in other cases we have local Marxist knowledge, but the authors don't have time or energy to write it for us, because, for example, because they are living from academia, so they have to publish it for more recognized journals. And on the other hand, it has the other side of the coin, is that sometimes we do not publish Marxist pieces, while Marxist analyses are published in more highly ranked but politically not engaged journals. Certainly, a challenge is that we consider that the deepening of a Marxist analysis is crucial, but even a full house issue lunch is not enough for the deepening of the knowledge. So we are currently thinking about introducing a popular education project, but any kind of further project requires additional time, which is already a bottleneck in our organization. And of course, there is the challenge of financial sustainability. Even if we can cover the production costs from the sales of the issues, but how can we compensate the labor of our authors and editors and translators and so on? And I guess this is really an issue with which practically all our initiatives are facing. And in the next 2 minutes, I will talk also about the Helyzet Working Group for Public Sociology, which was established in 2011. And actually, its primary innovation was that it attempted to produce a knowledge in a collective way, because funders realized that individual analysis is always limited to a certain aspects of the society. So only a collective analysis could give an actual big picture. And the original, or one of the first aims or research goals of the Helyzet Working Group was to understand the state socialism and post-socialist transition, and to produce a knowledge which, in a way in which its primary objective is not academic success, rather the building of movements of the left. And actually, at the beginning, it worked really well. On the one hand, because of the larger social political context, which was the crisis of the 2008 and the emergence of the Orbán regime in Hungary, because these changes shown that the previous explanations on Hungarian social formation cannot really explain these radical shifts in our lives. And on the other hand, the funders, primarily PhD candidates in Hungarian higher education, had the time and space for this kind of extra academic form of knowledge production. However, the Helyzet Working Group had its own challenges, and the most crucial challenge was that its model was also based on free time. So since we couldn't get funding for a collective research plan, we didn't have a chance to produce a collective knowledge, and we had the chance only to produce a collective knowledge in a theoretical way, but not in an empirical way, to return an already mentioned phrase. And so we didn't have a chance to collectively make an empirical try of our shared theoretical horizon. And the other challenge was that those who didn't get a job in academia or choose other careers actually dominantly disintegrated from the working group, and the working group has remained a platform for internal knowledge sharing and self-reflection. And the last challenge, I think, it's a challenge of risk of remaining a generational project of leftist researchers born in the 80s. And in the last years in the Helyzet, there was a, let's say, semi-successful attempt to involve younger researchers, but it's still a challenge about how to not remain or stay in this generational bracket. But of course, and I would like to finish with the bright side, that the individual researchers produced within the framework of the Helyzet Working Group are still informing the local movements of the left in Hungary, and maybe the brighter side is that our collective analysis on state socialism and post-socialist transition in the context of the capitalist world system were relatively successful, or in a sense that it became a kind of common sense in the local leftist context. So that was my part. And now it's time to turn towards the questions. There are a lot of in the Q&A section. And as I was checking, there's a returning question that how your projects of knowledge production are are reflecting to the state socialist heritage, or how can we, is it a crucial point of your knowledge production, or it should be a crucial point of knowledge production or not, or how do you approach this issue, or when you meet with your audience, is it a question which is raised? Oh, okay, if you are saying that you are leftist, what do you think about this and that? So, yeah. And sorry, and it's also a time for the speakers to react to each other. So I wouldn't like to dominate this part. So please also share your impressions and reflections on each other.
I don't know what is if we have some specific order, or we can just discuss. We can.
Go ahead and start.
No, I just had some question that was in my mind during the presentations, specifically, maybe not about presentations of people who are working in some kind of media, because it is specific, but more of these educational platforms or production of analysis and so on and so on and so on. Because I think that we on the left usually have a tendency to be self-sufficient, in the sense that we are doing interesting analysis that are different than what we have in the mainstream, that is putting different perspective in the public, but we are not actually reaching this public. We are somehow closed in our inner bubbles or circles, and I think that we still don't know how to communicate our perspective to broader public, and that's something that I don't know. I want to hear from your side as well. I think that we had a wave of production of establishment of these left-wing media in past years, which is, I think, important, and it is one of the answers to this problem that we are not reaching public, that we cannot reach mainstream media, so we are producing our media. But still, I think that we are lacking of this more proactive stance and more looking towards broader population and trying to make our perspective approachable for them and more visible for them, and to make them see that there is some interest for them in listening to and reading or whatever, you know, of our kind of analysis. And regarding your question of our socialist past, I think that it is quite important to deal with it in critical perspective, because I think we are still dominating this clash of demonization on the one side and some kind of nostalgia, but we don't have this critical perspective. And I think that we need this this left-wing critical perspective towards our socialist past in order to build on it. So maybe just a few points for start.
Can I say something? I liked very much Vladimir's presentation, and also the way he spoke now, because I think one of the biggest problem is to reach a larger audience. At least this was the problem for us at the Barricade. And what we are trying to do now is to reach out to unions and try to move away from this activist, I don't know, to move closer to the unions and to the workers, and not to the workers that we imagine and we describe in academic texts, but to the real ones, and to listen to them. Because I think one of the biggest problems is that any intellectual, we have to face it, we have this tendency of telling people, and especially after a long time spent teaching, it's very difficult to understand that you have to go and you have to discuss with workers. Even some of them may be very conservative, some of them may be extremely conservative, but you still have to go and discuss with the workers as they are, not as theoretical workers. And my project is to have a had podcast in Romanian with the union leaders and with the unions, with workers, to create a space for them to express and to discuss the problems they face at work. I think this is very important. So far, negotiations started, and I'm hopeful that we will kick off and we will start such a program, because I think it's very, very important to reach to a larger audience and to actually discuss with workers, with real workers, and to offer them a space where they can feel welcomed and they can feel safe to discuss about the abuses they endure in their workplace, and there are many.
I could also try to answer that question about how we engage with the socialist legacies, the legacies of state socialism. And in our Ukrainian context, of course, this question is aggravated by the fact that the state socialist legacy is often associated with Russia, and as I said, about being agents of Kremlin, and in the context of war that we have now, this accusation is also that not only we're nostalgic for the Soviet days, but also that, well, the accusers say, but also that we are pro-Russian or kind of pro-Putin. And how we respond to this, of course, first of all, we say that we are also opposing Putin's regime, and we're also very critical of Russia's role in the war. So this anti-militarist position is definitely not pro-Russian in this sense. Also, when we speak of state socialism and the legacies, we try to show some Ukrainian contributions to the development of communist thought, in particular, for example, in the 1920s, and many of those thinkers who were later repressed by Stalin, that it's not something that was imposed from outside, from Russia, on the Ukrainian people, but there were also some theoretical debates and discussions already in our context at that time. And many people try to engage with Marxism in critical and creative ways. And also from a more contemporary perspective, we try to show through our own work, through how we operate as editorial team, that it's very different from a state socialist kind of unique party line where we just have all the answers to all the questions and we try to impose it and persuade everyone. But we, in our own editorial board, we may have different views on some issues and we engage in debates. And often when we have conferences or events, we invite people who may be experts in certain area, even if they don't necessarily share our ideological views, but it will be interesting to discuss some questions with them. So that way we show that we are open to debate, to a variety of points within a kind of a broader kind of leftist perspective, but that it's not a homogeneous, monolithic, authoritarian thing, that it's that it can be democratic and inclusive. And in practical engagement also with activists and people who are practically involved in various issues, we try to form some solidarities and show that we are not some abstract evil leftists, some out there just kind of like as an abstract concept. Yeah, these leftists, who knows who they are, but that we are real people, that we are their friends, and yeah, when we know each other, we can engage in dialogue more effectively. So I guess these would be some of the things we're doing. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, so if I may, to respond to the two questions, one on state socialist legacy, and then the other question of reaching various audiences. Regarding the state socialist legacy, I think for most of the editorial collective that is based in the Department of Modern Czech Philosophy at the Institute of Philosophy of the Academy of Sciences, this is basically the focus of their research work, to critically interrogate and really focus their scholarship on theoreticians of the past, especially authors from the 60s and 70s, but perhaps older as well. So I would perhaps just point out maybe four fields or four fields that my colleagues from the editorial collective are focused on, and in accordance with which they also then formulate some of the research foci or topics that are debated in Contradictions in the journal as such. So firstly, my colleagues study the legacy of humanist Marxism of the 1960s in Czech and Slovak Republic, but recently we also published in Contradictions works of, as I already mentioned, of a Yugoslav philosopher, Blaženka Despot. So this is one field, humanist Marxism. The second topic is the techno-optimistic expert communities that were basically like the policy experts of state socialist elites in the 1960s during the Prague Spring. Another focus is on the dialogue between Marxism and religious communities in the past. And lastly, in the very last issues of Contradictions, we, for example, published materials also in English translations from the debate on the publication of Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. This debate took place in 1966 in Czech and Slovak newspapers and cultural journals. And even though we cannot really talk about feminism, proper feminism, I believe we can definitely think about the level and the character of gender sensitive or debate on gender issues in then Czechoslovakia. So these are at least like four fields in which the editorial collective and our authors in Contradictions debate state socialist legacy. Luckily, I have to say that none of us is party to the quite harsh debates on revisionism, so-called revisionism, that of course take place in Czech public. In this way, I think that we are sort of shielded from this from attacks on us. So this is the first question. Regarding the second question on the tendency to self-sufficiency on the left. From what I gathered from our debate is that our focus, the focus of many of our activities actually like differ. I think in Czech Republic there is definitely a bigger or deeper division of labor amongst activists, academics, intellectuals, organizers. So to me, it seems that Contradictions at this point is quite specific, really intellectually and scholarly oriented journal. We obviously are trying to reach out to new audiences. We are trying to support, for example, students in writing book reviews for us in the hope of them becoming authors of proper scholarly articles in the future. But all in all, I would say that our goal is not really to contribute to political debates, to timely political debates or policy proposals at this point. We are definitely open to intellectual reflections of political and social movements such as climate movement, feminist movements, and so on and so on. Our purpose isn't really to translate the theoretical language into something that is perhaps more palatable. So, and in this way, I think Contradictions really create a good space also for more really theoretical, intellectual work for people from Central and Eastern Europe who just want to primarily focus on development of their theoretical thought. I think it's also important to really have this space for more theoretical and intellectual reflection, apart from the necessary political work that perhaps Vladimir is now, Vladimir and other actors, and also Maria are focusing now, are now a lot more. So to conclude, there is larger division of labor in Czech political or leftist environment. So there are organizations that strive for the same goals that you, Vladimir. For example, Platzforma, which is called Reset. I may get you in touch. But Contradictions as such is really more focused on the intellectual production.
Thank you, Luba, for your intervention. We are slowly running out of time, but actually your thoughts on self-sufficiency recalled in my mind the phrase of Adela at the beginning of the collective care. And this is something that I would like to introduce for the end of our discussion, that how do you care for each other in your organizations. And I think it's important to discuss both the mental and material parts, or the mental and material parts together. So how can we sustain these organizations financially, and how can we sustain our mental health while we are working against the current mainstream capitalist lives? And we are at Fordlab, we are also facing with this situation that younger editors of the journal have to, or they are proofreading articles while they are doing some gig jobs and so on. So I would like to also glad to hear your impressions, maybe your best practices if you have in this regards, because I think it could be really inspiring for each other and something that maybe it could be easy to implement, hopefully.
As you can see, it's a very difficult question.
I know that's the reason why I asked.
Maybe I'll just say a word while other people are gathering their thoughts. Since Adela already spoke to this on the behalf of LeftEast, I don't think there's too much more I can say. But I think, you know, the position that LeftEast has taken is to not be funded. I mean, we have accepted funds for the summer schools, and Elmo has some funding, and insofar as that we are kind of imbricated in Elmo, there is some funding related to LeftEast, and we know that this is can create problems of sustainability, but we also believe that funding can create other problems of sustainability. So our choice has been, as Adela pointed out, to add new kind of fresh blood into the process that helps us be able to renew that energy. And that has also transformed LeftEast quite a bit, actually, in terms of our content and the way that we organize ourselves. So that is something that's maybe interesting to think about sustainability, because that's also where the question of care has come in, as we've tried to kind of understand over time the questions of burnout and the questions of what kind of labor people can do without financial compensation over time. That's been kind of useful, right? Because people have tended to get burnt out or even upset with some of the decision-making processes and completely disappear. And I think that we're, struggling with the question of how can people pull out and then come back in to remain invested, but not have to be there all the time. And interestingly, there's a lot of stuff that's psychological or psychosocial around guilt when people disappear, that they feel too guilty to return. So I think that this is one of the things that care work comes in, right? Is how can we create the space in which people can articulate what they can and cannot do rather than disappearing. So I'll stop there because I'd love to hear what other people have to say, not just about care work, because I know we introduced that in and it may not be something people are thinking about, but also sustainability over time. We would love to hear more on that.
So if I may, one very particular thing that we did in Contradictions, I think that we do not face the challenges that many of you do that work on your outlets in your free time. Well, me, myself, I work on Contradictions in my free time, but most of my colleagues consider this to be part of their working time at the Institute of Philosophy. So I think this is a huge difference to experiences of most of us on the panel. But nevertheless, there are people that are members of the editorial collective with different working obligations. So one solution, for example, when some of us got, I don't know, someone is finishing her PhD, other person gets on a new job. So what we introduced is more fluidity in being a member of editorial collective and being a member of the editorial board. So if someone cannot really keep up with the workload in the editorial collective, he or she can basically move to the editorial board for the time being to serve lighter, to work a bit lighter, and then get back to the editorial collective. So this is our way of dealing with the issue.
I could say something. Well, I don't know about the others, but had it not been for the barricade, I don't know how I would survive the very, how could I say, rigid and traditional and conservative workplace, especially at one of my universities. For me, this is a place where I told you, I feel free to navigate, to investigate, to share knowledge, and to enter into an honest debate with a lot of intellectuals and people on the left. And it is therapeutic, I have to say this, even though it's a lot of work. And it's a project that went on for more than 4 years now. And it looks like we are here to stay. I don't know for how long, but I think what saved us is the fact that Boyan has the ability to manage to solve a lot of financial problems, and he was able to take care of this part, while the others put in a lot of effort. And yeah, this is it. I think when you're working, as I do, in a very rigid and conservative environment, and you have on the other way traditional values, conservatives, and on the other hand, you have the imperative to publish or perish, you need a way out, you need a space to breathe. At least this is my personal perspective. And you need to feel like you're doing something meaningful, you know, because lately academia meant a lot of things that were done not as an end in themselves, but as means to get money, to get promotions, to get something else. So knowledge was in a way transformed into a means to getting money. That was basically it. And it devoid a lot of its critical power and fun. You know, that is the situation. I have a lot of fun on the barricades, and this is very important. Because I'm not taking much of your time, but I lived through a time at the Faculty of Philosophy in Bucharest when this was done on a daily basis, we used to meet, we used to discuss with professors, we used to spend hours at the universities, hours and hours discussing, debating, examining things. It was magic, you know, and then the financial pressures and the pressure to publish more, to be more productive, came and destroyed all of that. It was a moment when the authoritarian of the ex-regime was gone and the next regime's authoritarianism was not still in place. So I caught some sort of window. It was a lot of fun. And this is part of that fun I was able to find back here at the barricade. And this works for me. I don't know whether this was useful, but this is my personal take on it.
Thank you very much, Maria, and everyone who contributed to this question. We are running out of time, and since your pitches were really rich in content and dilemmas, there are a lot of topics that we couldn't really touch tonight, such as, in my mind, there are the question of educational outreaches and the question of how to produce a locally embedded organic knowledge. And these are crucial questions, but I'm afraid that we don't have time for these tonight, hopefully in the next time. But as the closure of the webinar, I would like to make a round and just to ask each of you to say one sentence about your main personal and main takeaway of the webinar. If it is okay.
Okay, so maybe I'll start. So for me, it's fascinating to see how, on the one hand, diverse our activities are, but I can definitely see that there are many activist groups and platforms that we can get in touch with, be it intellectual or political. So I think, at least like for me, there is great potential for international cooperation, not just between Contradictions as a journal, which, but also potential for collaboration between various movements that we are also attached to as members of the editorial collective. So I'll be more than happy to create connections between certain organizations that haven't been mentioned here at this point, but that I feel would better perhaps at points respond to some of the needs and expressions of your interest in your introductory speeches. So yeah, thanks.
I must say that when you sent us invitation for this webinar, you posed really important questions, and I was aware that we cannot answer to them in 5 minutes of our introductory talks, but it was really good meeting you all, and I hope that we will have more of similar spaces to continue discussing these questions, because they are quite important for the development of the left in Eastern Europe and even wider. So, and thank you once again for inviting me to be part of this event.
I would also like to thank you for the invitation, and I'm so happy to see that there's so many of us working on similar issues and facing similar challenges. One of the takeaways for me personally, what I liked in the presentation is that a lot of our work is not just about content, not just about the text that we produce, but also about trying to about the way how we relate to each other and how we create different spaces of interaction in this process of knowledge production. So I particularly liked the contribution from LeftEast where it was mentioned about the care work, and in other contributions there were also these questions: how do we organize this production of knowledge, and how do we work in contexts that are very capitalist oriented, like in academia, for example. So I would like to thank for raising this question as well, that it's not just the content of our texts, but also how we work together. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for inviting us to this meeting. I think it's very, very important, and I hope it to be the first of a series of regular meetings where we discuss various topics. My personal takeaway, it's like I'm happy that I saw new faces. I kind of knew that, I kind of had this impression that I kind of know most of the leftists in Eastern Europe, and I'm glad I was surprised. So it's good that there is a movement. It's good that we still don't know each other, all of us, and we should do more to work together, to do more things together. And it's very good that we're doing this diverse range of activities, that we're trying to explore various topics, we're experimenting with various instruments, which means that we're doing interesting work and there is still potential. So we're not repeating just ourselves and just doing some ritualistic things. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward for great things, projects, ideas, and maybe a great common future for us.
If I may continue, I just wanted to briefly repeat the idea that I think that the very important format for the collaboration among us would be summer schools, which could be dedicated to two things. First of all, is like developing and articulating specific points of political program of, let's say, next time left-wing East European post-Soviet left-wing party, which offers something, because the demand for such a program is appearing in different post-Soviet and East European countries. And another thing is I think our possibility to develop left-wing Marxist analysis of different research empirical data. So I think that such a format dedicated to these things would be the most important, the most fruitful, the most effective ability to collaborate among us.
So I will say that for me, the main takeaway from the webinar, which interestingly coincides with my main takeaway from my experience at LeftEast, is on the one hand a sense of affinity and recognition with the struggles and positionings of in different national contexts, and on the other hand a sense of a real need to analytically understand these local configurations of the shared structural constraints that we have, which to me means, on the one hand, the possibility to circulate knowledge among ourselves, but more than that, the possibility to produce something of a transnational knowledge from the left, not just in the region or about the region, but more broadly. And I will not be able to here refer to the question about how we speak to Venezuela and Cuba and China, but I just want to put it out there that that is an important question, not just for each of us individually, but for us regionally.
My takeaway actually resonates to what Anastasia said about that our labor is as much community organizing, as much a pure intellectual labor. And I have really this impression during my work at the Helyzet or at the Fordulat that it's really about building communities too. And I was also really inspired by the pitch of Vladimir that how can we build the infrastructure of these communities to create a kind of sustainability and stability for them, also for the future.
Well, my takeaway is that I agree here perfectly with Vitalie Sprinceana. It is so good that there are so many initiatives and that things are moving. And after 30 years of mainstream discourses praising and lionizing capitalism, we have critical discourses trying to challenge that. So yeah, I think it's great.
I'll just add very quickly. I was also really happy to see people here who I haven't already met and don't already know about. That was really exciting because there is often that feeling that you know everyone on the left in the region. So and to see the different ways that that these questions are being approached is really inspiring. So thank you all.
Thank you all for joining tonight for this webinar. I really enjoyed moderating and participating in it. And I also hope that we will have further occasions to continue this shared thinking and work. And don't forget to join to the last section of this webinar series in 2 weeks, the decoloniality and Eastern Europe session, which you can see also in the share screen. So thank you for joining tonight and have a nice evening.